Okay, perfect. So this looks great now. So what I'm going to do is have folks introduce themselves, and they're going to do just a little bit about themselves. I think it would make sense to, wow, this just seems to have given up. Okay. I think it would make sense to have Monique go first. So this is Monique, everyone. So, Monique, I'm going to take them through your slides while you talk. Is that cool?
Yeah, I'm like here, like me first. Dun dun dun.
Awesome. All right. Okay.
All right.
All right. Your slides are now. Let's see if I can figure out how to view these full screen. I'm afraid almost.
Present to the right.
You're afraid almost.
Yep. Okay. Here we go. Your slides are now up. So, if you want to tell everybody about yourself.
Yeah. So obviously, hi everybody. I'm Monique Blake. You can follow me on Twitter, or you can look at my janky website. I'm Sergeant Janky. On the next slide, it just gives you a very good description of what my personality is like. This was at Maker Faire Act. This was not my product. This was what was it called, like a Hug Hatch or something like that. I don't remember the name, but it was at Maker Faire, and I really liked them. When Phoenix came up to me and said, hey, you need to do introduction slides, I was like, I'm the worst person to do this. I can't introduce myself out of a paper bag, but next slide. So yeah, as I said, I'm really bad at self-introductions. I'm also a member of New York City Resistor, and I've been a member since, I believe, October 2014. And that was a little bit after Maker Faire that I got the membership. I went to school for engineering at Smith College, and I work for engineering, therefore I am an actual engineer. I happen to toggle between back-end programming and hardware engineer. And the next few slides just shows you exactly what I do. A lot of my work has been me doing a lot of PCB assembly from copper sheet to prototype ready. So like I'm fabricating the entire thing, going through the population process, solder masking, or pretty much I solve problems. Like I solve whatever problems are given to me, I find a way to do it. For the last 3 years, slide 7, for the last 3 years, I have been involved in tech education. I teach various age groups in tech education. So it's not just children, like 6-year-olds, but all the way up into like older people. And it really varies in terms of how you teach them and what to teach them. The next slide shows the students that I've taught in the past. That's from Script Ed, and I'm kind of sort of in the corner, but I blend in very well because I look very young. Next slide. I'm also an artist for the most part. I was co-designer of an art installation in Bryant Park, and I'm currently attending a programming boot camp in San Francisco, which is why I'm not in New York City right now. The next slide shows you that same art installation I was talking about. In addition to that, on my free time, I make jewelry. And you could follow my Instructables and look at that same ring over there. I posted a full tutorial on how to make that same thing. And then I also make other stuff. And then I also draw. And I like baking things and experimenting with food. And I also play instruments on my free time. I did this because I realized since I've been in San Francisco that all interests are actually well appreciated and well received. And I'm not typically the type of person who advertise what they do. So I thought, well, if Phoenix said to me, give yourself an intro, well, what do you want? Give her everything, you know?
Awesome. So, let's see, make sure. And then I figured we would move on. And, yep, to you. So here's a mic. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Can you scroll it up to just the top of the other way?
Okay, zoom it out a bit. There you
Yeah, if we could just have that text on the screen, that's fine.
go. Okay, perfect.
It's maybe a little long.
That's all I can get. Yeah.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect.
So I'm Johanna Hedva, and I'm here today in my capacity as the Director of Initiatives for the Processing Foundation. I have no slides. I'm just going to tell you how it came to be that a queer, genderqueer, white-passing, mixed-race Korean and white performance artist witch like myself came to work for an open source software project. My background is that I went to school for 2 years in physics and hated every minute of it because the culture was so toxic. And then I transferred to UCLA to the Design Media Arts department where I met Casey Reese and various other people with whom I'm still collaborating with and in dialogue with. And then for about 7 years, I worked as a performance artist in Los Angeles and a writer. And at some point, just completely coincidentally, I ran into Casey and I was like, hey, what's going on? And he was like, well, we just started a nonprofit and we need help. So processing has been around since 2000. It's one of the most used open source programming languages for creative work and also many other things. It's scalable in its complexity. And then Lauren McCarthy had just started p5.js, which is the browser version of it. And so Casey was like, we started a nonprofit to maintain these amazing software projects because all of the inventors or leads were full-time faculty or working other jobs. And so I joined the team as the only person that gets paid. And our resources are incredibly limited and scaled just to my resources, which are also really limited because I'm chronically ill. So I said to Casey, you know, are you sure that you want me to join this? Because I'm very vocal about my politics. I use words like anti-white supremacy in my bio. Are you sure you want my name on your website? And Casey said, actually, the question is if you want to be associated with us. That's exactly why we want you to work for the Processing Foundation. So in 2014, I started what's called the Initiatives Program, and we are very invested in trying to make open source specifically address things like disparities in the culture within open source and technology in STEM and STEAM fields, particularly around race, gender, sexuality, ability, and class. So I have various initiatives that I can share with you or answer questions about during the panel, but that's sort of what I'm here to talk about today.
Great. And then I thought, Holly, would you like to introduce yourself now? I'll make yours nice and large as well. There you go.
So, hi, I'm Holly. I am also, along with Monique, a member of NYC Resistor, the hackerspace that's right nearby here in Brooklyn. Can you, thanks.
Just tell me
I'll
when you want me to
do
go.
this.
Okay, all right,
Okay.
great.
Our motto is learn, share, make, and learn and share are just as important as making in our space. Our space is actually about, we're almost at gender parity. We're about 44 to 46% female, which is unheard of in hackerspaces. And a lot of the reasons why that's the case are the reasons that pulled me back into technology. So just a short thing about my journey. Okay. When I was very young, my father taught me like programming and basic. So like I had a little bit of background in some amount of programming. But as I got older, I kind of just didn't follow through with any of it. As I got older, I found that coding felt kind of dry. I really couldn't imagine myself in a career using it. And so I didn't really do that much. Over the years, my husband would join some organizations that were involved with computers and programming, like, I don't know if any of you have heard of like 2600 and groups like that. And I never really felt like I belonged. I never felt like I knew enough to really be an active participant in those kinds of organizations. But when we moved to New York, actually hit it again because there's a thing that pops up late for some reason. No, back, okay. There you go. When we moved to New York, he joined NYC Resistor, and I started going, and it was like so different from the other places that I had been. I got really pulled right in. The people there were playful and curious and welcoming and nurturing, and it was a really great feeling to be in the space and be around them. They were also doing really cool things with code, like things that were reaching into the real world and making like lights blink and making noise and making things move. And I'm like, oh, I know a little bit of code. You know, maybe I could do these things too. It was very inspiring. And also, even though I didn't really know that much, it felt like it was okay to be there and to spend time there because their open night is called Craft Night on purpose to bring people in who are curious but not as knowledgeable yet. So I would go and knit when I first went, and that's completely normal there. People do that. It's fine. And so the attitude there is one of, if someone, they sort of celebrate victories and they also celebrate your mistakes. It's okay to not know everything. There's no intimidation. There's no like knowledge tests or anything like that. So if you go in and it makes you feel like it's okay to try something that might not work. That's fine. Okay. And so this is me. This is the first place I felt like I could just learn from the people around me, as opposed to like having to show how much I knew to the people around me. So this is me learning how to do surface mount soldering, which if you haven't done it, it's really cool. I learned like, for instance, Eagle, like there when I wanted to maybe try designing my own PCBs. And if you've ever tried to learn Eagle, it's a very frustrating process. But I had the members sitting around me at the table, and they would give me like really useful advice and make Eagle jokes, and made it a much more pleasant experience. One of the things about Resistor is that we go beyond, and that I think makes it so successful, is that we go beyond just making the space welcoming for women, but we actively recruit women, because it's cool if you're like, okay, my space is great for women, we make it welcoming, we're cool with women coming here, and no one shows up, and you're like, well, they just must not want to be here. But the fact is, if you walk into a room and there's nothing but men, then you start to think, well, maybe there's a reason, and I'm not going to really be welcome here, and I'm not really comfortable. And if you're a woman and you walk into a room like this and it's all men, you've had experiences there that kind of just put up the red lights for you. But if you have that critical mass, that sort of threshold of women in the space, then you know when you go in, oh, this is going to be great for me, this is going to be okay. And that really cool woman who's doing the really amazing stuff that you really want to have in your space, you want them to have that experience when they walk in and go, oh yeah, like this is a place where I think I can thrive. And I just wanted to thank the people who took the pictures that I showed you. Okay.
Awesome. Great. So that kind of kicks off our panel. So I'm going to kind of keep the mic close to me and Johanna so we can kind of share it easily. So there are some questions. Let me get Monique back up on the screen.
Oh yeah, and I should say, at Resistor, we're really great at bringing in women, but not as good with bringing in minorities. So I'm really interested to hear Monique's thoughts and have that discussion as well.
Great. Wonderful. All right. So my first question here is so if a community is lacking diversity, what are some of the first steps that we could take to start to begin to deal with this issue? Who wants to take that one?
I think I kind of gave a little bit of an answer in mine, just actually reaching out to the community and actually talking to them and trying to bring them in and say, hey, this is cool, you should come with me on this night or whatever, that it's open, and check things out.
Monique, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah. It's kind of hard to gauge when you're like on the other side of the planet kind of thing. But I actually do have a lot to say regarding the diversity. Holly is saying, well, you invite people, but I've done that before too, just in general. And that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to come. They're just going to be like, yeah. No. And if it's lacking in diversity isn't just about mindset. Of course, you have to do a lot more work, but when you're talking about skin color, actual like ethnic diversity, it's a whole different ballgame. It's an interesting topic that's come up at Resistor, and I remember right before I left for California, I had this conversation with a fellow Resistor, And I won't necessarily try and speak on behalf of a specific group, as I believe the situations highlighted in the next few sentences, even like, yeah, it's going to be in line with lower income people, but it's going to apply to all groups for the most part. I think one of the biggest things about increasing diversity at a hackerspace may actually mean being okay with not increasing diversity at first within the space. Passively waiting for minorities to join while being friendly enough is not necessarily the best step, as there are real barriers to entry that they might face that you might not. Like where I live in New York is so far away. That's a huge barrier to entry. Like why would I even have the incentive to go all the way to a certain hackerspace if I don't even have a means to get there? Anyway, I digress. It may mean going in the trenches and going into these communities directly and learning what values do they hold dearest. That's something that a lot of people don't ask. And what challenges do they face? And how the topics presented at the maker community might be a betterment to their lives, whether it be a path to a better education or giving them the idea as to how to solve a major deficit in their community. Like some communities might not even have proper grocery stores, for instance. I think it's important to provide these groups some value through education. And this may take multiple attempts, but you must understand that there may be a low return on immediate investment depending on the demographics. That may mean learning what format works best for them. Something like giving them proper access to resources or giving them ways where they are able to make a start without tons of money, without expecting anything in return is the best, meaning no return on your end. Typically, in communities that may have less of an income, they may not have the incentive or ability to commute to the hackerspace, just like what I said, because it's most likely out of reach. Increasing diversity also hinges upon informing people of the possibilities. I can speak as someone who went to public school in Southside Jamaica, Queens, not too far away, that in certain groups, people are unaware of the possibilities. There's so much I didn't know, and I still don't know about the tech scene that like you might have learned about since you were in high school. But we're also trained to believe in some of these groups that we're not going to amount to anything. We're trained to believe that we're not as good enough and never will be. And it doesn't change. Like I went to a very good school in college, and my teachers didn't even think I could make it. You know, I had teachers who said they thought I was slow, and that's because I think partially because of the color of my skin and because I asked questions and I generally didn't know things like percent uncertainty, you know. Another thing is to understand that those who may be in the minority at your space may also have the same access to things that you take for granted. I mean, may not have the same access to things that you take for granted. And that has nothing to do with being lazy or being a charity case. They just may not have it. That being said, it is often that bringing in more diversity will mean, from a privileged perspective, to not look down upon those people who are raised in a different environment, who may not have the same knowledge you have acquired in years prior. They have something to contribute too. And they have more knowledge in an area that you don't, and you should always remember that. Diversity will also mean learning how to create an environment where people feel vulnerable enough to share their perspectives and knowledge or lack of knowledge without judgment. It is really important to actually be welcoming, friendly, accepting to a group you wish to admit. There have been many times in social situations, personally speaking, where I'm aware that I'm being ignored due to not looking like the majority. Like I'll come up to somebody in a group of people and then they'll look at me and then look away and then continue on their conversation. This will never go away from me. I know that. But if you're aware of it, you could also improve upon that. Like if you have to be aware of that. So this is not the way to go. Don't do that. And also don't be friendly to a group out of obligation, because that has never worked. It's never worked. You should also understand that everyone has their own strength. Everyone can improve and develop new interests and skills and excel, especially if they're given the tools, the leverage, and the supportive environment to do so. If you're here, you're most likely were at that point. You reached that point before, and you should also understand that putting these practices in place will not necessarily be a benefit to only the diversity aspect you wish to attract within a group, but it will also improve the original structure for the member to fit into that majority. It's an accessibility thing, like you could see it as like assistive technology to some degree. Yeah.
That was an amazing answer. Yay! I literally could not type fast enough. I was like, that was fantastic. Thank you for sharing your perspective. I think there's a lot in there that is very valuable. And I wish I had you with me at the VNA in London recently.
How long ago was that?
It was, I was in an opportunity where I was able to speak and present to an entire group of people who've created hackerspaces in the UK. And I had a very angry white man come up at me and go, why should I care about diversity when we've worked so hard to build our community, and why should I help or be part of my, and I was like, I can't even. And he just had, he had no value for other people. It was amazing. So anyway, thank you for sharing your perspective. Does anyone else want to comment or contribute to that?
I'll say something. One of the things that has come up in the work of the Processing Foundation is because the processing-related projects are so established at this point and have sort of been around for I think we're going on 16 years for processing, and P5 is becoming more and more established. One of the things that is very much on my mind is what can the foundation do that isn't already being done around these projects? And I'll just be blunt. I mean, a lot of work is being done using processing with a certain kind of privileged group, people that already own a MacBook Pro, people that are already have their MFAs, people who are already knowledgeable about how they want to use the software and for what in their practices. And that's all great. And I think that that's one of the things that has been so successful about processing. But for me, being, called the director of initiatives and being tasked with kind of expanding our community and nurturing new communities, a lot of questions come up around how our resources should be directed. And most of the time, we get a lot of invitations to do things like workshops for media arts departments, which is, we usually just say, you can probably do a workshop without our help. Like, you can probably do it fine. Let us know how it goes. And that doesn't mean that we aren't supportive of those things, but in terms of where we're directing our resources, it's specifically more toward things like that places and demographics and cultures that haven't had the same access to this or who aren't as familiar with these things as a lot of other people are. So some of our initiatives have failed, I'll just say that, because we realized that they were maybe serving an audience that was already being served. And because our resources are so limited, we were like, maybe we should spend our time somewhere else, nurturing and fostering something that hasn't already had a lot of attention and support.
Okay. Oh, I think yeah, do you want to say, okay, hold on. Maybe it's easier to
Maybe
just move the mic.
it's easier to just move the mic instead of this.
This heavy stand. Yeah, just put that down. Okay, so then the next thing I have is I would like to take a second and talk about how we are going to deal with attracting people who are not all of the 20 to 35, 40 age set. Because I think that there's a lot of very limited age perspectives in hackerspaces. I seem to see less very young or very old people. I think that the very young community is really well served by things like Make, but the older community doesn't seem to have as much of a presence in these spaces. So I was going to see if people had any thoughts about age and ageism in hacker communities.
We definitely NYC Register is 18 and over for, just like insurance reasons, because we keep alcohol in the space, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the art that people produces isn't, parents don't want their kids around it. So, like, we definitely don't have children unless it's a member who has one of those, like, the little babies you can strap to yourself. Sometimes they show up, and that's fine. But we probably could do a lot better in getting older participants involved. And we do have a few older people who show up fairly regularly, but it's not... I wouldn't say like it's a community that shows up, and I don't really know why that is. I think it's a really good question. I know one issue we have is because we're 18 and over, when members have kids, they often drop out a little bit. They'll still show up, but they don't have the same level of engagement, because when you can't bring your kid, you would need a sitter every time you come, and that's a hassle. So, but we would have to change our space quite a bit to make that happen.
I've only ever seen one hackerspace that had childcare, and I think that that's something that is, if you want to talk about including women, really important. And I'm not sure how we can restructure or think about how to structure our communities in ways that support that kind of...
I think it would be like if we felt that our space was a space that we wanted to make child friendly, I don't think it would be difficult. We would need space to be able to have kids have their space to run around without getting involved in the soldering irons and the power tools and the woodworking equipment and all. Like, you would need a little bit of extra space. But I think the kind of community that we've built, it would be easy to say, so these nights are like nights when like one person is going to be there who's going to hang with the kids, and everyone else who comes and brings their kids can hack, arranging sitting among members, like, and taking turns doing that sort of thing. Our group would totally do that with no problem if the physical space that we were in allowed it.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be something we could encourage. I've been thinking about with Code Liberation, which is an organization that I founded with a lot of the folks here at Facets that teaches women to program for free. We've been trying to look into like how could we begin to provide childcare and what that should look like. So Monique, did you have anything you wanted to add on that one?
Not really, but at the same time, it's all an accessibility issue, as I had said before. And I think, I don't want to say this, but I think with the older people, after teaching them for so long, a lot of times they just feel forced into this environment, like this new world, and their kids are doing this, so they just have to force themselves to do it, but just know that one thing and one thing only. So they already feel discouraged as it is, because they're like, this isn't how I grew up, and this is hard for me to wrap my head around.
I'm just thinking, we're one situation where I have seen older people come into our space is during our classes. We're very big on classes, so we have classes almost every weekend. And I've seen older people there, and maybe something we need to do is start talking to them and saying, hey, what do you think about our space? Do you think this is a place you would come on a regular basis? If not, why not? And what would you look for in a space so that we can start thinking about how, to accommodate people?
Yes.
Yeah, and find out what they actually like, what they value.
Exactly. So the next question I have for folks is talking about addressing the lack of queer, trans, and gender nonconforming individuals visible within hackerspaces and open source communities, and of course in tech in general. And what are some of the best ways we could begin to, raise visibility and raise awareness within those spaces for folks? Would you like to take that one?
Yeah, that was the one that I suggested I wanted to talk about. One of the things that I wanted to sort of use today to talk about was that last year we were invited to the Google Summer of Code Mentor Summit because for 5 years we have participated in Google Summer of Code, which is a high school and college, or maybe it's just college, open source education initiative where college students are paid to basically work a summer job doing an open source project. And group of students last year were the most politically oriented that we had ever had before, and it was fantastic. The student that I mentored proposed making P5 tutorials that were feminist and anti-racist. So Google paid us to meet once a week and like talk about bell hooks, and like it's kind of an oxymoron maybe, but when we were then invited to be representatives at the Mentor Summit, I went and Sam Levine went, and we were totally shocked at the demographics there. You imagine that the open source, kind of more popular open source venue of being Google Summer of Code might have a better look into diversity. I was one of about 6 women passing people there, and anytime anyone talked to me was just to address how I looked or how tall I was or what my hair looked like. And so this was something that I had a kind of just a reality check about the larger culture that we're a part of. And so one of the things that I think became more solidified as my mission is to expand and make more nuanced this idea of women in tech. Because diversity, as we all know, has become a kind of corporate mandate. It was like Intel or something was like, diversity is good for business or something like that. So things like thinking about women in tech, to me, must include thinking about gender, and gender as a spectrum, and queerness and transness and gender nonconforming people being invited or being made comfortable in these fields. And this is something that I totally agree with Monique on in terms of like going into a community and understanding what values are there, as opposed to just inviting and being friendly and assuming that we're on the same page already. Like, you know, yeah, you should come because you're probably interested in this, aren't you? That's sort of a really, I think, important question to think about, and to, I guess I just want to say like nuance, and making it less simplified. I think saying women in tech is the beginning of a larger conversation. And so sexuality and gender identity are 2 things that the Processing Foundation now are much more vocal about, as well as race and ability, and accessibility in class.
For NYC Resistor, we do have queer and trans members, and I don't feel comfortable speaking for them as far as what their experiences have been in our space. I haven't heard anything negative and have heard positive things from them, but again, like I can't personally state what all of their experiences are and all of their feelings around it. As a matter of policy, we have a code of conduct that says, that no one should make any abusive comments, actions, et cetera, towards anyone based on their orientation, gender, their identity, their sexuality, et cetera. And we are serious about that, so we are quite willing to call people out when they say stuff or act in a certain way in our space and ask them to leave if they continue. So, that's how we handle things.
Cool. Monique, did you have anything you wanted to add on that front?
I actually agree with Holly that you can't really speak on behalf of that individual. And even if you ask them, if the community if they don't feel the community is supportive enough, they're not going to say it in your face. They might say it behind closed doors with another person, maybe outside of the hackerspace, just because they might have this understanding that you might not just get it. Like, how many times could someone say something? Like, in society, there have been many complaints about people acting a certain way that may be sexist or racist or homophobic or transphobic, and people still will repeat those same things and be in denial at the same time. So it's a very hard topic to get someone to talk about and say, well, this is what actually happened to me at the hackerspace many times, or that one day.
Right. So that brings me up to two of the things that I think are important, I may meld them into one kind of question. So the question I have are, what are strategies for including the communities that are respectful and thoughtful? So what are some strategies? And that depends radically on the community, I'm sure. But if people want to take a minute and answer some strategies they think would be effective for engaging specific communities that they hold dear or feel they're part of, that might be beneficial. So,
Excuse me. In NYC Resistor, one of the things that I think has been important to making us successful, as far as at least bringing women in, is that we curate our membership. So we're an invite-only group, and that came out partly out of necessity because we're a small space. We can't grow very quickly, but also partly of a conscious decision to create a comfortable, trusting community within our hackerspace. So what we do is, when people start showing up, when we see the same person at our open nights over and over again, and we start getting to know them, and we think this person is going to be a great member of our community, then we will invite them in. And we also have, as part of our policies, that if there's a no questions asked veto. So if, when we're ready to vote on someone becoming a member, if there is any member who does not feel comfortable with that person, they can veto, and there's no questions asked. You can proxy your veto through someone else if you want to remain anonymous as well. So that, again, helps create a trusting environment. And then the second part of that is being willing to actually use your enforce your code of conduct.
Monique, do you want to say anything or add anything to that one?
Yeah, I don't know anything about originally starting a hackerspace, but I see with a lot of companies, it can become a toxic work environment just by how they begin it. And I think a lot of times it starts with us as individuals. Like if I want to go start something, I have to be very conscious of who I am as an individual. I have to be very mindful for that matter. And with that mindfulness and with that, like the life lessons that I learned and how to actually treat people, that's the only way I can cultivate an environment that would be closest to the ideal of friendly and welcoming and including of people, or whatever you want to include.
Cool. Johanna?
Say something. I just want to say too that we're maybe this wasn't clear, but the Processing Foundation, we don't have a physical space. So we're a nonprofit foundation that has a budget to fund certain initiatives, and one of them is our fellowship program. And P5 is another kind of major initiative that we are working on in terms of having contributors events and community events, and sort of we don't like the word sprint because if you Google image that, it's a little horrifying to see what kind of images come up in terms of the lack of diversity. But one of the things that we were really invested in terms of beginning P5 with our first annual contributors conference was to completely use language around community code of conduct. The code of conduct we wrote together collaboratively with everyone there at the conference. And so a lot of our initiatives we have to communicate our goals and our ethos in language, since we aren't a space and since we just do virtually things that then, maybe have a meeting place in real life. So that's something that has been a big process with us, is thinking about language. A lot of the time, just language is an indicator if you're going to be welcomed there or if those people are down, Like one of the conversations we have a lot is it's okay to preach to the choir, but we also want to be sure that the people that are, maybe not yet in the choir and maybe don't yet even know if they want to join the choir and also don't even know the words to the song, like if they feel that they can still hang out in that concert hall. That's our little metaphor that we're using lately.
Cool. And then the other thing, it kind of comes down to how we create codes of conduct and then how we enforce them effectively, and what experience maybe folks have had with crafting codes of conduct in their communities. So
we actually fairly recently created our code of conduct. the group was started with one rule that you can't scare away women, and also the general sort of hackerspace statement of be excellent to each other, that sort of thing, which is a terrible code of conduct because it does not define behavior that is okay and not okay. And the fact is that sometimes people show up who maybe just don't know what the appropriate way to behave is. And if you define those behaviors that are not okay in your code of conduct, you can educate people. Maybe they will know what to do and not to do. You can't just say, you can't use a label. You can't say, like, don't be a creep or don't, whatever. So our process of writing our code of conduct was long and very involved. It involved several weeks of discussion, but it was really good to actually sit down and define specific things that we expected to have happen in our space and things that we didn't want to see in our space. And for enforcing, when we've had problems, one good way to keep things working in your space is to recognize the people in your space who are good sort of diplomats, who are really good at de-escalation, who are good at cutting through drama and making sure that situations can get resolved in a reasonable way. Because when we have had problems in the past, we tend to go to there's like 3 or 4 people who we know are really good at that sort of thing and go, okay, so let's have a conversation. Let's talk about how we're going to deal with this. And they're usually we know they are really good at coming up with a solution that's not going to be harmful to anybody. So identifying people in your group is also good.
I just want to say really quickly that this issue came up when we were writing our code of conduct at the conference, the contributors conference last year, that we decided that we don't like the word enforce because it's a police word and it involves the word force. So we just sort of collectively started a conversation around that, like, what does it mean to have a code of conduct, and sort of think about the actual language within it, and if we want to be using words like enforce or policy, which also has its etymological root in policing. So that's just something that I'm throwing in there.
It's really valuable feedback. Monique, do you have anything you want to include or add about Resistor? Were you there when they,
No, I think Holly said all of it.
Cool. Okay, awesome. Yeah, we've been dealing with that with code liberation recently, and writing the code of conduct came very easily because now at this point there are a lot of resources online for code of conducts. You can Google, code of conduct, and tons of resources have come up in the last years around that. But creating a way to address, and one of the things that I was like, okay, well, we need a way to respect anonymity, a way to create ways that reporting, when the reports come in, that we allow the person to opt in or out of being part of that conversation going forward. What does that look like? How do we resolve these conflicts? And I think that trying to come up with a document of guidelines for that situation is going to be really challenging for code liberation, because we've definitely had issues in the past. We've had some pretty intense stuff go down with some of our mixed nights where we've had guys come up and verbally harass some of our members. And usually what has happened is I manage to get the person to tell me, sometimes months later when we're out for coffee but often like not having a system for reporting that allows for anonymity and allows for safe reporting, I think can be really detrimental. So.
Yeah, there's contact information in our code of conduct, so we definitely want people to feel like there's someone that they can immediately talk to if they or reach out to if something happens.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, I think it's 3:55. So does anyone have any questions for any of the panel members? Yes, Maddie, please.
So what's really interesting about inclusion conversations is that we usually want to kind of get people to come in and join our club, which really has values and activities that we already do. And because of how tech is in our culture right now, there's some there's something if you don't join our club, you're kind of going to be left behind. That's kind of like the implication in the tech industry overall, not necessarily the clubs themselves, but it's this idea that like if you're not part of tech, you're kind of a part of culture is leaving you behind. And it's always been kind of interesting because I somehow got drafted into an engineering school. I still don't understand because I'm not a coder still, and I don't consider myself a technologist. But I still consider that the things I do are related to technology. But very often these are kind of hackerspaces or code events are specifically saying like, oh, like you need to code and then you're going to come and do things with us. Like I use technology in different ways without that. So I'm kind of curious to see maybe the ways that you all have probably handled these sort of outliers. People probably are joining but like resisting in those ways of kind of, let's say, coding or learning certain things and maybe sharing strategies of doing that sort of stuff.
They are not outliers in our space. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go first?
No, you can go first.
Yeah, they are not outliers in our space. We have like one of our members came in as a pop-up book engineer. So, she does a lot of like paper folding stuff and art in pop-up books. And now she's teaching like paper electronics classes. We have people who do comic book or graphic novel like art design and layout and things like that. We have a lot of freelance artists who use technology in their art who are members. And we I feel like doing the whole craft night thing is part of that you're bringing in people from an artistic background who are interested also in technology, and they feel like I don't have to just do code to be here. I can do the creative tech, I can do art and craft and things like that, and then bring in what I want from the tech aspect into my work.
Yeah, I'll just say that all of the processing foundation is 4 board members and me, and all but one of them consider ourselves artists. Processing was invented by Casey Reese and Ben Fry, who both came from a design and an art background. I don't code. I'm one of those people that didn't make it. Like, I wasn't able to sustain myself in the tech industry. I didn't like it. I felt alienated, and I dropped out of it. So I'm not, whenever I get invited to even events like this, I feel like a big outsider. I mean, look, I have this is the first time this has ever happened in a technology conference, right? I mean, there's something to me about, what is interesting to me about processing and P5 is that they were made for artists. And so we're very interested in the ideas of exploration and creativity and experimentation rather than learning how to code so you can go get an engineering job. That's fine. There are plenty of ways that you can use processing or P5 to do that. But our primary goal is to promote the arts as a major, way of thinking in the 21st century, a way of using media as a creative expression, mode of creative expression, that kind of thing. So in some ways, we've always considered ourselves to be a little bit of the outsiders within the code and open source communities because we're more interested in art and creative expressions and things like that.
Monique?
Yeah, I wanted to expand upon what Holly said, and it is also went the other way too, because right now not only do we have craft night, but on alternate nights we have knitting nights. So 2 of the members who are programmers, which by the way, Resistor to me is very programmer heavy, artist heavy, and not too heavy on the hardware. So 2 people who are into the programming world decided, hey, I'm very interested in knitting. And then they taught themselves how to knit. Then they brought it to the community and decided to host nights where people come in and knit. And now it's this big thing. It's not craft night, it's a laser night.
Yeah, we have like laser/knit night. Every other laser night is also knit night, which is kind of fun.
Great. Well, I would take more questions, but I got the roll it up gesture from Caroline. So if folks want to join us or speak after to us, they're welcome to. Thank you so much. Goodbye, Monique.
Bye, Monique.
Thank you for
Bye,
joining
Monique.
us.
Bye.